A golden-eyed horse emerged from the mist, guiding a woman to the entrance of a hidden tunnel deep in the mountains. The sound of a baby crying echoed from within, awakening memories she had tried to forget. In the depths of her being, she found answers that defied her understanding of the world and herself. But danger lurked, forcing her to choose between the past she was trying to leave behind and the future she needed to protect. Before listening to this true story, remember to subscribe to the channel to hear more exciting stories like this one. The wind whistled through the ancient pines of the Blue Ridge Mountains as Sarah Thompson watched the sunrise from the porch of her cabin. Her fingers, calloused from years of working with heavy machinery, absently caressed the coffee mug she held. The steam rose in spirals, mixing with the morning mist that covered the mountains like a protective blanket. It had been 5 years since she had chosen this refuge, far from the metallic clamor of the railroads that had defined her life. The accident in Atlanta had left scars deeper than those visible on her left forearm. Every night in her nightmares, she relived the screeching of brakes, the screams, the smell of hot metal. A distant neigh interrupted her thoughts, something unusual at these heights where horses rarely ventured. She squinted, peering into the thick vegetation, but the fog concealed any movement beyond a few yards. The sound of a pickup truck approaching on the dirt path brought her back to reality. She recognized the official Forest Service vehicle before it stopped in front of her cabin. Mark Hawkins, the forest ranger who occasionally brought her supplies, got out with an expression she knew all too well: trouble. "Good morning, Sarah," Mark greeted, adjusting his hat. "We need your expertise. Whatever you need, the answer is no," she replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "I left that world behind." Mark pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. "We found something in the old tunnels, under the abandoned tracks, something that shouldn't be there." The mention of the tunnels caught her attention. During her years as an engineer, she had heard rumors about a network of underground passages dating back to the Civil War era, but she had always dismissed them as local legends. "Tunnels?" she asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "And this," Mark added, extending a photograph showing a strange mark engraved on a stone wall. The symbol, a spiral intertwined with what appeared to be a horseshoe, seemed eerily familiar to her. "Where exactly?" "Sector 7, near where they plan to reactivate the line for chemical transport." The cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Reactivate the line? Who authorized that?" "Frank Morrison." The name fell like a stone in a calm pond, sending ripples of unease through her body. Frank Morrison, her former supervisor, the man who had mysteriously disappeared after the Atlanta accident. Before she could respond, a thunderous sound shook the mountain. It wasn't thunder, but something deeper, more primal. The neigh she had heard before was repeated, this time closer, more urgent. "What was that?" Mark asked, instinctively reaching for his regulation weapon. Sarah was already in motion, putting on her boots. "Let's find out." They followed the sound to a nearby clearing, where the mist was beginning to dissipate. What they found there defied all logic. A horse of extraordinary proportions, with a coat that seemed to change color under the sunlight, was standing next to the entrance of what appeared to be a partially collapsed tunnel. "Impossible," Sarah murmured. "It's him." "You know it?" "Project Centaur," she replied, her voice trembling. "But it was supposed to have been destroyed in the lab fire 10 years ago." The horse observed them with an intelligence that went beyond animal. Its eyes, a bright amber, seemed to contain secrets that threatened to destroy everything Sarah thought she knew about her past. Suddenly, Centaur turned towards the tunnel and neighed again. The sound echoed against the stone walls, revealing something that had been hidden, a metal door camouflaged with the natural environment. "This isn't just an abandoned railroad line," Sarah said, approaching the door. It's an entrance to Morrison's underground laboratories. As she examined the door mechanism, a yellowed paper fell at her feet. It was an old photograph, deteriorated by time. In it, a young Sarah appeared next to a newborn foal. On the back, an inscription, Project Centaur, Subject 0, Genetic Mother ST. The world seemed to stop. The implications of that simple photograph threatened to destroy the fragile peace she had built in these years of isolation. Sarah, Mark called, pointing to something on the ground. There are recent tracks, we're not alone here. Before they could react, a series of howls broke the silence of the mountain. Through the mist, they could make out the silhouettes of several grey wolves, their eyes glowing with an unnatural gleam. Centaur positioned himself protectively in front of them, his behavior confirming what the photograph suggested. He wasn't just an experiment, he was part of something much bigger, more personal. A baby's cry, weak but unmistakable, emerged from inside the tunnel. "My God," Sarah whispered, "history is repeating itself." The darkness of the tunnel seemed to swallow the light from the flashlights as Sarah, Mark, and Centaur advanced towards the source of the crying. The air became denser with each step, charged with a metallic smell that awakened memories buried deep in Sarah's mind. "This isn't just a railroad tunnel," Sarah murmured, running her fingers along the walls. "Look at these marks. They're camouflaged ventilation ducts. Someone turned this into an underground laboratory." Centaur stopped abruptly, his ears moving forward. The baby's cry had intensified, but now it was accompanied by a more disturbing sound, the hum of electronic equipment. "Over here," Mark exclaimed, illuminating a half-open door. What they found inside left them breathless. An abandoned control room, flickering screens showing incomprehensible data, and in the center an improvised crib. Inside, a baby no more than 6 months old looked at them with surprisingly aware eyes. Sarah approached the crib, but Centaur moved ahead, gently placing his head next to the baby. The little one extended his hand, touching the horse's muzzle, and at that instant, all the screens in the room began to flicker frantically. "Incredible," Mark whispered, observing the monitors. "The brain patterns. They're synchronized." Sarah approached one of the functioning computers. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, accessing files that shouldn't exist. "Project Nexus," she read aloud. "Phase 2, psychic integration between modified subjects and—" A metallic noise interrupted her. The doors of the room slammed shut, and a familiar voice resonated through the speakers. "Welcome home, Sarah." Frank Morrison's voice sounded exactly the same as 5 years ago. "I see you've found our little miracle. What have you done, Frank?" "Me. I just completed what we started together." "Remember those DNA samples you donated during your time on the project? They've borne extraordinary fruit." The implications hit Sarah like a high-speed train. "The baby is your child. Genetically, yes. But it's much more than that. It's the bridge between two worlds, the perfect link between human and animal consciousness." Centaur neighed softly, as if confirming Morrison's words. "The wolves are yours too, aren't they?" Mark asked, keeping his weapon ready. Her dry laugh resonated through the speakers. "The wolves are just the beginning, but I needed something more personal for this experiment, something with a direct genetic connection." Suddenly the lights went out, plunging the room into total darkness. When they came back on seconds later, a familiar figure was standing in the doorway. Lucy Morrison, Frank's daughter, whom Sarah remembered as a brilliant junior scientist on the original project. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Lucy said, her eyes full of tears. "I tried to stop him, but I couldn't. The baby, he's my nephew. Sophie, my sister, she—" Before she could finish, a tremor shook the facility. The screens showed a countdown, 20 minutes. "Purge protocol initiated," announced a computerized voice. "Frank, no!" Lucy shouted towards the speakers. "The psychic link isn't stable yet." If you destroy the facility now, the baby... Another tremor, stronger than the previous one, caused dust to fall from the ceiling. Centaur nervously stirred, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall that seemed to... move. "The wall?" Sarah whispered. "It's not a wall." The panel slid away, revealing an ancient map of the tunnels, but what caught her attention was the symbol engraved in the center, the same spiral with a horseshoe they had seen before. "It's a genetic map," Lucy explained, approaching. "Each tunnel represents a branch of the experiment, and that symbol, it's our mother's signature." "Your mother?" "Maria Elena Vasquez, the scientist who started all this in the 80s. She discovered how to create psychic links between species, and paid for it with her life." A distant howl echoed through the tunnels, followed by the sound of claws against metal. "The wolves," Mark said. "They're entering the ventilation system." Centaur positioned himself protectively over the baby, his eyes glowing with supernatural intensity. For a moment, Sarah swore she saw a flash of light pass between the horse and the little one. 17 minutes until total system purge, the computerized voice reminded. "There's something else," Lucy added, pulling a device from her pocket. "The train. It's not just going to transport chemicals." Frank plans to use the line to distribute a compound that will amplify psychic links on a massive scale. He wants to create a shared consciousness network. "At what cost?" Sarah asked, holding the baby while Centaur watched the entrance. "At any cost," a new voice answered from the shadows. Everyone turned to see Jason, Sarah's former teammate, emerging from a side corridor with a metal briefcase in his hands. "The future of human evolution is on that train," Jason continued. "And nothing, not even you, Sarah, can stop it." The briefcase in Jason's hands emitted a faint blue glow through its slits. Centaur stirred uneasily, his eyes fixed on the object, while the baby began to cry with an intensity that made the emergency lights flicker. "It's not just a briefcase, is it?" Sarah asked, noticing how the veins in Jason's arm seemed to glow with the same blue tone. "It's the catalyst," he replied, his voice strangely distant. The key to unlocking the dormant potential in our DNA. Frank called it Project Genesis. Lucy stepped forward. Jason, you're infected. The compound is altering your neural structure. Infected? He laughed. I'm evolving, as everyone will when the train distributes the catalyst through the country's main rail lines. A new tremor shook the facility. 15 minutes until system purge, the computerized voice reminded. Suddenly, Centaur neighed loudly, pushing everyone aside just as a section of the ceiling collapsed. Through the gap, two grey wolves descended with supernatural grace, their eyes glowing with the same blue tone as the briefcase. Fascinating, Jason murmured. The synchronization is already beginning. Mark aimed his weapon at the wolves, but Sarah stopped him. No. Look at their eyes. They're suffering. It was true. Despite their threatening posture, the wolves seemed to be fighting against an invisible control. Their muscles tensed and relaxed, as if two wills were battling for dominion over their bodies. The psychic link, Lucy explained, quickly consulting a tablet. It's not natural. Frank is forcing the neural connections, but the animals are resisting. At that moment, the baby extended his small hands towards the wolves, and something extraordinary happened. The animal's eyes blinked, alternating between the artificial blue and their natural color. Centaur approached them, establishing a protective circle around the group. Impossible, Jason whispered, his own composure beginning to crumble. The baby is interfering with the neural control. No, Sarah corrected, a revelation hitting her. He's healing them. The true purpose of Project Genesis was never control. It was Harmony. A new message resonated through the speakers, but this time it wasn't Frank's voice, it was an old recording, a woman's voice. Mother protocol activated, initiating purification sequence. Lucy paled. That's my mother's voice, but she died 20 years ago. The walls began to glow with phosphorescent symbols, revealing patterns that extended throughout all the tunnels. The genetic map on the wall came to life, the lines pulsing like luminous veins. Maria Elena knew, Sarah said, finally understanding. She knew Frank would corrupt her research. She left a security system. That can only be activated by the right combination of DNA, Lucy completed. The baby, Centaur, the wolves, they're not failed experiments, they're keys. Jason, now visibly affected by the catalyst, staggered forward. No, I won't allow it. The future, the control. Before he could reach them, Centaur intervened. The wolves, now free from artificial control, positioned themselves at his flanks. The baby laughed, and with that sound, a wave of energy pulsed through the facility. 10 minutes until system purge, the computer announced. There's something else, Lucy said, frantically typing on the tablet. The tunnel, they're not just laboratories. They're part of a natural purification system. The marks on the walls are ancient mineral filters. What does that mean? Mark asked, keeping an eye on Jason. It means, Sarah replied, that Maria Elena didn't just create a security system. She created a method to reverse the effects of the catalyst. A new tremor, stronger than the previous ones, shook the facility. Through the cracks in the walls, a crystalline liquid began to seep, glowing with a soft greenish tone. Spring water, Lucy whispered. Filtered through ancient minerals, the true cure. But as hope began to grow, a new voice resonated through the speakers, one that chilled the blood of all present. Omega Protocol initiated, Frank Morrison announced. If I can't control evolution, no one will. The distant sound of an approaching train echoed through the tunnels, and a new countdown appeared on the screens. 5 minutes until impact. The roar of the approaching train reverberated through the tunnels as the group watched the multiple screens showing its inexorable advance. Sarah recognized that sound. A driverless train, remotely operated, loaded with the catalyst that could change the face of humanity forever. We need to evacuate, Mark urged, but Lucy was already shaking her head. We can't. If that train impacts, the catalyst will disperse in aerosol form. The Blue Ridge Mountains will be just the beginning. The baby, still in Sarah's arms, extended his small hand towards one of the glowing walls. Instantly, the phosphorescent symbols pulsed with greater intensity, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing an ancient control console. "It's the original system," Lucy whispered, her eyes gleaming with recognition. "The one Mom designed." Jason, now completely consumed by the catalyst, let out a broken laugh. "It doesn't matter what you do." Evolution cannot be stopped. Centaur approached the console, his amber eyes reflecting the glowing symbols. The wolves, now fully liberated from mental control, stood guard at the laboratory entrances. 4 minutes until impact," the computer announced. Sarah handed the baby to Mark and approached the console. Her fingers trembled as she examined the ancient controls. "This isn't just a railway control system," she murmured. "It's something more. It's a nexus," Lucy completed, pulling a medallion from her neck. "Mom always said that true evolution doesn't come from control, but from connection." The medallion, when placed in a slot on the console, fit perfectly. The laboratory lights flickered, and a new voice, warm and familiar, emerged from the speakers. "Harmony protocol initiated. Welcome, my daughter." Lucy held her breath. "Mom? I've been waiting for this moment," Maria Elena's recording continued. "The catalyst was never designed to control. It was a key, a way to awaken the natural connection between all living creatures." Suddenly, the baby began to glow with a soft, golden light. Centaur neighed softly, and the wolves howled in harmony. The laboratory walls, covered in ancient symbols, pulsed to the same rhythm. "3 minutes until impact." "Frank misinterpreted everything," Maria Elena's voice continued. "He sought control when he should have sought balance. The true power of Project Genesis isn't in domination, but in synchrony." Jason lunged towards the console, but the wolves intercepted him, their eyes now glowing with a gold similar to Centaur's. "No, the control. We need—" "Control is an illusion," Sarah replied, understanding at last. Her hands flew over the console, inputting sequences that seemed to emerge from some deep place in her memory. Maria Elena didn't just leave a security system, she left a path to true evolution. The baby laughed, and with that laugh, all the electronic systems in the laboratory came to life. The screens showed new images, DNA patterns intertwining, forming structures never seen before. 2 minutes until impact. "The train," Mark began, but Lucy interrupted him. "It's not just a train, it's an energy conductor. If we can synchronize the catalyst with the natural purification system, we can transform it," Sarah completed, "not into a weapon, but into a bridge." Suddenly, a new figure appeared on the screens. Frank Morrison, his face contorted with rage and fear. "Stop! You don't understand the power you're manipulating." "You're wrong, Father," Lucy replied, her eyes shining with determination. "For the first time, we understand it perfectly." The baby extended his hands towards Centaur, and an arc of golden energy connected them both. The wolves howled again, and this time the sound seemed to resonate with the earth itself. 1 minute until impact. Sarah looked at Lucy, a silent understanding passing between them. "Your mother. She knew this moment would come." "Yes," Lucy replied, placing her hands on the console. "And she left us everything we needed to do the right thing." At that moment, the ground began to shake, but not from the approaching train. The laboratory walls pulsed with their own life, the ancient symbols glowing more and more intensely. 30 seconds until impact. The roar of the train mingled with the rhythmic pulse of the symbols on the walls as the countdown continued relentlessly. 20 seconds. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an ancient and powerful energy. "Now!" Lucy shouted, pressing her hand against the central panel. Sarah imitated her, and instantly a current of golden energy flowed through their bodies. The baby emitted a crystalline laugh, and all the symbols on the walls burst into light. Centaur neighed, his coat glowing with the same golden energy, while the wolves howled at a frequency that made every molecule in the air vibrate. 10 seconds! Frank appeared at the laboratory entrance, panting. "You can't do this!" You'll destroy years of research. No, Father, Lucy replied without taking her hands off the panel. We're completing the research, as Mom always wanted. 5 seconds. The sound of the train was deafening now. Sarah could feel the vibrations through the floor, but something else was happening. The water seeping from the walls began to flow upwards, defying gravity, forming crystalline patterns in the air. 3, 2, 1. The impact never came. Instead, a blinding flash flooded the tunnels, followed by absolute silence. When the light dissipated, the screens showed something extraordinary. The train had been stopped, suspended in a field of golden energy. Impossible, Frank murmured, falling to his knees. But the truly amazing thing was happening inside the laboratory. The catalyst in Jason's briefcase began to transform, its artificial blue color turning golden. The water crystals in the air formed an intricate network, connecting everyone present in a pulsating energy field. "The Harmony Protocol," Lucy whispered, her eyes shining with understanding. It wasn't a security system. It was a bridge. Suddenly, Maria Elena's voice filled the space again, but this time it was different, more present, more real. True evolution was never about control or power. It was about connection, about remembering what we have always been. A translucent figure began to materialize in the center of the laboratory. Maria Elena, or at least a projection of her, smiled warmly. "Mom," Lucy whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "My dear daughter," the projection replied. "And Sarah, my brightest student. I knew you would understand." "How is this possible?" Sarah asked, not letting go of the panel. "Consciousness never dies," Maria Elena explained. It only transforms. Project Genesis wasn't about modifying life, but about remembering our primordial connection to it. The baby gurgled happily, extending his hands towards the projection. Maria Elena smiled. "He is the living proof, not an experiment, but a reminder of what we can all be when we open ourselves to the true nature of existence." Jason, still affected by the catalyst but now transforming, slowly stood up. His eyes, previously an artificial blue, were beginning to glow with the same golden tone. The symbols on the walls, Maria Elena continued, are older than civilization itself. The ancient inhabitants of these mountains understood what we forgot, that everything is connected, that consciousness flows like underground water, nurturing all life. Frank, still on his knees, looked at the scene with a mixture of awe and horror. All this time, was I wrong? Not wrong, Frank, Maria Elena replied gently. Just lost, as we all have been. Suddenly, a new tremor shook the facility, but this one was different. The walls began to transform, the ancient symbols merging with the living rock, creating new patterns. The awakening has begun, Maria Elena announced, but this time it will be different. This time it will be as it always should have been. The transformation of the laboratory continued at a dizzying pace. The walls, once rigid and artificial, now pulsed with their own life. Crystalline veins extended like roots, connecting every corner of the underground complex. Sarah, still with her hands on the panel, could feel the energy flowing through her. It was as if every cell in her body was awakening, remembering a truth forgotten eons ago. "What's happening?" Mark asked, observing how his own skin began to glow faintly. "Evolution," Lucy replied, her voice mixed with awe and understanding. But not as we imagined it. It's a return. Maria Elena's projection smiled, her form becoming increasingly sharp. The catalyst was never designed to create something new, but to remind us of what we have always been, connected beings, part of a greater whole. The baby, now wrapped in a soft golden glow, emitted a laugh that resonated with a peculiar frequency. The water crystals in the air vibrated in response, forming increasingly complex patterns. Frank, still on his knees, observed with a mixture of fear and repentance. All this time, I sought control when the answer was always connection. "It's never too late to understand, dear," Maria Elena said, extending an ethereal hand towards him. "True power isn't in dominating, but in harmonizing." Suddenly, a deep roar shook the entire mountain. It wasn't threatening, but rather like the awakening of a sleeping giant. The laboratory screens showed amazing images. The tunnels and caverns throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains pulsed with the same golden energy. "The mountain," Sarah whispered. "It's alive." "It always has been," Maria Elena confirmed. "The ancients knew it. They built these tunnels not just as shelters or laboratories, but as a nervous system for the Earth itself." Centaur neighed softly, approaching the baby. The wolves, now completely transformed, moved with supernatural grace, their eyes reflecting an ancestral wisdom. Jason, slowly recovering from the effects of the artificial catalyst, stood up shakily. I can feel it. It's as if I could hear the thoughts of the mountain." "Because now you can," Lucy explained, extending a hand towards him. "We all can." Project Genesis wasn't about creating superhumans, but about reconnecting with our true nature. The laboratory screens began to show images from all over the world. Points of golden light appeared in different places, as if the awakening was spreading globally. "The train," Mark suddenly remembered. "What happened to it?" Sarah approached one of the screens, showing the train suspended in the energy field. "It has become a nexus." The catalyst is being purified and transformed. "And with it, everyone who comes into contact with it," Maria Elena added. "But it won't be an imposition. Each being will have the choice to awaken to this new consciousness." Frank, finally accepting the situation, stood up. "How can we ensure that this doesn't get out of control, that it's not misused?" Maria Elena smiled tenderly. "That's the beauty of true connection, Frank. It can't be controlled or misused." It's a natural balance, self-regulated by the collective consciousness of all beings. Suddenly the baby emitted a sound, not a cry, but something more like a song. Centaur and the wolves responded in unison, and the entire cavern vibrated with a harmonic frequency. "It's beginning," Maria Elena announced, "the Great Awakening. But remember, this is just the beginning." The real work comes now, learning to live in this new reality, to be guardians of this reborn knowledge. Sarah looked at Lucy, then at Mark, and finally at Frank. In their eyes, she saw the same understanding reflected, the same mixture of awe and responsibility. "What do we do now?" Mark asked. "Now," Sarah replied, feeling the energy of the mountain flow through her, "we become the bridges this world needs." Between the past and the future, between science and nature, between the human and the divine. As she spoke, the laboratory walls continued to transform, revealing ancient engravings and symbols that had remained hidden for millennia. The history of humanity and its connection to Earth unfolded before their eyes, a forgotten narrative that was now being reborn. Dawn filtered through the cracks in the mountain, bathing the laboratory in a golden light that mingled with the pulsating energy of the awakening. A new day was beginning, not just for them, but for all of humanity. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks of the mountain, bathing the transformed laboratory in a golden glow. Sarah, Lucy, Mark, Frank and Jason found themselves in a circle with the baby in the center, while Centaur and the wolves formed a protective perimeter. Maria Elena's projection began to slowly fade. "Remember," she said with a serene voice, "the knowledge you have awakened is a gift, but also a responsibility. Use it wisely." When Maria Elena's image completely disappeared, the silence that followed was profound and full of meaning. Each of them could feel the pulse of the mountain, the connection with every living being around them, and the immensity of the task ahead. Lucy was the first to speak. "We need a plan. The outside world isn't prepared for this." Frank nodded, his face showing a mixture of repentance and determination. "You're right. And I have a lot to make amends for." My contacts in the government and scientific community could be useful if they're willing to listen. Before contacting anyone, Sarah intervened, we must fully understand what has happened here and what's happening out there. She pointed to the screens showing the golden light points expanding across the world. Mark, who had been silent, finally spoke. As a forest ranger, I can help protect this area. We'll need to keep away the curious and those who might want to exploit this discovery. Jason, still recovering from the effects of the artificial catalyst, approached the group. I know the dangers of seeking power without understanding. I can help identify and prevent attempts to manipulate this energy. The baby cooed softly, and everyone felt a wave of calm and clarity. Centaur approached, lowering his head towards the little one. "The baby," Lucy said in amazement. He's like a natural amplifier of this new consciousness. We need to protect him and learn from him. Suddenly, one of the screens flickered, showing news images from around the world. Reports of inexplicable phenomena, people experiencing moments of supernatural clarity, and animals behaving in unusually intelligent ways flooded the media. "It's happening faster than we thought," Frank murmured. Sarah's approached the main console, her fingers moving with a certainty she didn't know she possessed. "We can use this system to monitor and, to some extent, guide the awakening. But we need to be cautious." "What about those who don't want to awaken?" Mark asked. "Not everyone will be ready for this." "That's the beauty of the system," Lucy replied. "As Mom said, it's self-regulated. Those who aren't ready simply won't connect with the energy." We can't and shouldn't force anyone. As they discussed, the symbols on the laboratory walls continued to transform, revealing new patterns and knowledge. It was as if the mountain itself was communicating with them, offering guidance and ancient wisdom. "I propose the following," Sarah said, taking on a natural leadership role. "We'll divide into teams. Lucy and I will work on understanding and refining the awakening process. Frank, use your contacts to prepare the ground in the scientific and governmental world, but with extreme caution. Mark, we need you to coordinate the protection of this area. And Jason, your experience will be crucial in identifying and preventing potential abuses. Everyone nodded, feeling the weight and importance of their roles. And the baby? Jason asked. Centaur neighed softly, approaching the little one. The wolves also came closer, forming a protective circle. I think, Lucy said with a smile, he already has his own guardians. Our task will be to learn from him as much as we protect him. As the group prepared to face the challenges ahead, a soft tremor ran through the mountain. It wasn't threatening, but rather like a sigh of relief, as if the earth itself was grateful for this new beginning. Outside the laboratory, on the surface of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the first signs of awakening began to manifest. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in centuries opened their petals. Animals of different species gathered in harmony. And in nearby towns, people began to experience moments of deep connection with nature and with each other. The dawn of a new era had begun, and these improvised guardians were at the heart of it all. The adventure was just beginning, and the future, though uncertain, shone with a golden promise. The days following the awakening passed in a whirlwind of frantic activity. The underground laboratory, now renamed the Nexus by the group, had become the operations center for what seemed to be a silent revolution on a global scale. Sarah and Lucy worked tirelessly at the main console, monitoring the progress of the awakening around the world. Holographic maps showed the propagation of the golden energy, which they now called the resonance, spreading like ripples in a pond. "It's fascinating," Lucy murmured, pointing to a cluster of bright points in Southeast Asia. "It seems that areas with deeply rooted spiritual traditions are experiencing a faster and more harmonic awakening." Sarah nodded, but her expression was one of concern. "Yes, but look at this." She pointed to another region where the points were flickering erratically. "In conflict zones, the resonance seems unstable." It's as if negative emotions were interfering with the process. Meanwhile, Frank hurriedly entered the Nexus, his face a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "We have a problem. Governments are starting to notice. I've received calls from old colleagues in positions of power. They're scared and some are considering drastic measures." Mark, who had just returned from a surface patrol, joined the conversation. "It's not just governments. I've had to turn away 3 different groups of UFO hunters in the last 48 hours. People are noticing the changes, and conspiracy theories are multiplying." Jason, who had been working in a corner of the laboratory, analyzing samples of the resonant energy, looked up from his microscope. "That's not all. I've detected hacking attempts on our systems." Someone is trying to access the Genesis project information. The baby, who until now had been sleeping peacefully in an improvised crib, began to stir. Centaur, always nearby, neighed softly, and the wolves approached, forming a protective circle. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, feeling the weight of responsibility. "We need to act, and fast. We can't allow fear and misinformation to contaminate the awakening." Lucy nodded, an idea forming in her mind. What if we use the resonance to communicate directly? Not with words, but with emotions, with pure truth. "It's risky," Frank warned. "It could be seen as a mental invasion." "Not if we do it correctly," Jason intervened. "The beauty of the resonance is that it can't force anything. It only amplifies what's already there." Suddenly the baby emitted a sound, not a cry, but something more like a melody. The water crystals in the air began to vibrate, forming complex patterns. "I think," Sarah said, watching in wonder, "our little friend has an idea." Working together, the group began to design a plan. Using the main console and guided by the baby's reactions, they created what they called truth pulses, waves of resonance charged with pure emotions of peace, understanding, and unity. As they prepared to send the first pulse, they faced a new challenge. The screens showed a fleet of military helicopters approaching the Blue Ridge Mountains. They found us, Mark said, his voice tense. Frank stepped forward. Let me talk to them. I know some of the commanders. Maybe I can buy us some time. But before he could leave, the ground began to shake. It wasn't an earthquake, but something deeper, more primordial. The walls of the Nexus glowed intensely, and everyone felt an ancient and powerful presence. The mountain, Lucy whispered. It's... protecting us. On the surface, the helicopters encountered an inexplicable phenomenon. A golden mist rose from the valleys, enveloping the Blue Ridge Mountains in an impenetrable shroud. Inside the Nexus, the baby laughed, a sound filled with pure joy. Centaur and the wolves howled in unison, and at that moment, Sarah knew what to do. It's time, she said, placing her hands on the console. Let's send the pulse. Not just to protect ourselves, but to show the world the truth of what's happening. One by one, they all joined her. Frank, Lucy, Mark, Jason, even Centaur and the wolves formed a circle around the baby. The energy built up, pulsing with the force of truth and pure connection. When the pulse was released, it expanded like a wave of golden light, piercing through the protective mist and extending beyond the horizon. All around the world, for a brief moment, millions of people experienced unprecedented clarity and connection. As the energy dissipated, the group watched the screens with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The global awakening had entered a new phase, and they were at the heart of the storm. The silence that followed the truth pulse was profound and filled with expectation. In the Nexus, Sarah and her team watched the screens with a mixture of awe and anxiety, waiting to see the repercussions of their action. The first reports began to cascade in. All over the world, people from all walks of life were reporting extraordinary experiences, moments of absolute clarity, sensations of deep connection with nature and each other, visions of a more harmonious future. "It's incredible," Lucy whispered, her eyes scanning the data flowing across the screens. The pulse has acted as a catalyst, accelerating the awakening in areas where it had already begun and initiating it in others. Frank, who had been in constant communication with his contacts, hung up his phone with an expression of amazement. The helicopters, they've withdrawn. The commander in charge reported an experience that left him moved. He said he couldn't, in good conscience, intervene in something that felt so profoundly right. However, not all the news was positive. Jason pointed to a map showing zones of instability. In some areas, especially in regions with deep-rooted conflicts, the pulse has generated confusion and fear. Some people weren't prepared for such an intense experience. Mark, who had gone up to the surface to assess the situation, returned with mixed news. The golden mist has dissipated, but it's left a palpable change in the environment. The animals are calmer, the plants seem more vibrant. But there are also groups of people camping in the surrounding areas, seeking the source of the miracle, as they're calling it. The baby, who had been unusually quiet during the pulse, began to stir. Centaur approached, followed by the wolves, forming a protective circle around the little one. Sarah observed the scene, an idea forming in her mind. The baby. I think he's tuning into something. Something bigger than us. As if responding to her words, the symbols on the walls of the Nexus began to glow with greater intensity. Patterns that had seemed random before now formed coherent sequences, as if an ancient language was awakening. Lucy approached one of the walls, her fingers tracing the luminous symbols. This is incredible. I think we're seeing the physical manifestation of Earth's collective consciousness. Suddenly, all the screens in the Nexus flickered, showing a unified image, a global map covered with interconnected golden lines, pulsing with life. The ley lines, Jason murmured. The ancients were right. The Earth has its own nervous system, and we've awakened it. As the group contemplated this revelation, a new wave of challenges presented itself. Social media exploded with testimonials, theories, and debates about what had happened. World leaders issued cautious statements, scientists demanded explanations, and religious groups interpreted the event in various ways. "We need an action plan," Frank said. "We can't remain hidden for much longer. The world deserves to know the truth, but we must present it in a way that doesn't cause panic or be misused." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "You're right." It's time to come out into the light, but on our terms. Working together, the group began to design a gradual disclosure strategy. Using Frank's network of contacts, Lucy and Jason's scientific knowledge, Sarah's experience in crisis management, and Mark's connection with nature, they created a plan to introduce the world to the new reality in a controlled and positive manner. As they worked, the baby emitted a soft, almost musical sound. The symbols on the walls pulsed in synchrony, and everyone felt a wave of clarity and purpose. "I think," Lucy said, smiling at the little one, "we have the approval of our youngest guardian." As the day progressed, new challenges and opportunities emerged. Reports of inexplicable healings, of ecosystems regenerating at unprecedented speeds, of scientific breakthroughs inspired by visions during the pulse. But worrying news also arrived. Groups that saw the awakening as a threat, corporations seeking ways to monetize the new energy, individuals experiencing unexpected side effects. The team worked tirelessly, guiding, explaining, protecting. They knew they were on the threshold of a new era for humanity, and that every decision they made would have profound repercussions. As the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains, bathing the Nexus in a golden glow, Sarah looked at her team, at the baby, at Centaur, and the wolves. In their eyes, she saw reflected the same determination, the same sense of wonder and responsibility. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with emotion and resolution. "We have a long road ahead, but together, we can guide humanity towards a brighter, more connected future." The baby laughed, a sound filled with pure joy, and for a moment, they all felt the promise of tomorrow, bright and full of possibilities. The sun rose over the Blue Ridge Mountains, bathing the new Nexus complex in a golden glow. Where once there was a hidden underground facility, now stood a research and education center open to the sky, harmoniously integrated with the mountainous landscape. Sarah observed the sunrise from the main terrace, a cup of coffee in her hands, reflecting on the year that had passed since the Great Awakening. So much had changed, and yet the challenges continued. "Good morning," Lucy greeted, joining her. "Ready for the conference?" Sarah nodded, a mixture of determination and nervousness on her face. "As ready as one can be to address the United Nations and the entire world." The complex bustled with activity. Scientists, spiritual leaders, diplomats, and curious individuals from all over the world had gathered for the first anniversary of the awakening. Today's conference would be broadcast globally, another step on the path of integration and understanding. Frank appeared, his impeccable suit contrasting with the dark circles under his eyes. "The last delegates have just arrived. The Secretary General is eager to begin." In the past year, Frank had been instrumental in building bridges between the Nexus and world governments, navigating the turbulent waters of international politics with new wisdom and patience. Jason joined the group, tablet in hand. Resonance levels are stable worldwide. The fluctuations we saw last month in Southeast Asia have normalized. Jason's work had been crucial in understanding and monitoring the global expansion of the resonance, preventing imbalances and guiding its harmonic integration into different cultures and ecosystems. Mark arrived last, accompanied by Centaur and the Wolves, all quiet on the perimeter. The anti-resonance protesters are remaining peaceful. Despite the positive change the awakening had brought, not everyone had welcomed it with open arms. Groups that feared change or felt threatened by the new expanded consciousness had emerged, presenting constant challenges. The sound of children's laughter filled the air. In a nearby green area, the baby, now a toddler of almost 2 years named Aiden, played with other children under the watchful eye of caregivers and parents. His growth and development had been extraordinary, serving as a beacon of hope and a constant reminder of awakened human potential. "It's time," Sarah announced, straightening up. The group headed towards the main auditorium, where representatives from all nations awaited. As they walked, Sarah reflected on the events of the past year, the gradual integration of the resonance into society, from medicine to agriculture, transforming entire industries. The challenge of managing the spiritual tourism that had flooded the Blue Ridge Mountains and other high resonance points around the world. The unprecedented scientific advances, especially in quantum physics and neuroscience, inspired by the new understanding of consciousness. Conflicts resolved thanks to greater empathy and connection between world leaders, although some pockets of tension persisted. The renaissance of ancestral traditions and indigenous knowledge, now validated by modern science. The ethical and philosophical challenges posed by the new reality, which had led to global debates about the future of humanity. As they entered the auditorium, an expectant silence fell over the audience. Sarah took her place at the podium, flanked by her team. She took a deep breath, feeling the resonance flow through her, connecting her with every person in the room and, by extension, with the entire world. "Distinguished delegates, citizens of the world," she began, her voice firm and clear. "A year ago, our species awakened to a new reality. Today we are here to reflect on our progress and to chart the path forward." As Sarah spoke, images were projected behind her: regenerated forests, cities transformed into vertical gardens, schools where children learned not only with their minds but with an expanded consciousness, hospitals where healing occurred at levels previously considered miraculous. "We have achieved much," she continued, "but our journey is just beginning." The resonance has shown us our potential, but it's up to us to fully realize it. We face challenges, resistance to change, fear of the unknown, the temptation to use this gift for personal power rather than the common good. At that moment, Aiden entered the auditorium accompanied by Centaur. A murmur of amazement ran through the audience. The child, with wisdom beyond his years in his eyes, smiled at the public. "But we also have hope," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. In our children, in our renewed connection with Earth, in our capacity to grow and evolve. The awakening wasn't a one-time event, but the beginning of an ongoing process of discovery and transformation. As she concluded her speech, Sarah felt a wave of emotions sweep through the room. It wasn't just the power of her words, but the resonance itself, amplifying the truth and connection among all those present. "The future we imagine is within our reach," she finished. A future of harmony, of understanding, of unlimited potential. Together as a united humanity and a revitalized Earth, we can make that future a reality. The applause that followed was deafening, but more impactful was the sense of unity and purpose that filled the auditorium and extended beyond, resonating in hearts and minds around the world. As Sarah rejoined her team, with Aiden in her arms and Centaur by her side, she knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles and surprises, but also of wonders and discoveries. The Great Awakening had begun, and humanity's adventure in harmony with Earth and the cosmos continued.